I was imparting a little information. When you ask a question, you should listen to the answer, my girl. Otherwise, you will gain absolutely no benefits from being in my company. It is the proverbs of knowledge to speak, and the privilege of wisdom to listen. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Two Doctors, written by Robert Holmes, and is the last story directed by Peter Moffat. This is the third multi-Doctor story in the classic series. It's also the last multi-Doctor story in the classic series. Now, let's get one thing out of the way in terms of the behind-the-scenes making of this. The Three Doctors was made to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Doctor Who, starting from Unearthly Child all the way up to 1973. The Five Doctors was to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who, so showing all the pre-incarnations up till Peter Davison as the Doctor. The Two Doctors was written because Robert Holmes wanted a vegetarian inspired story, and John Nathan Turner liked Patrick Troughton and Colin Baker together at a party. This story doesn't actually celebrate the anniversary or an achievement in Doctor Who, and because of that, though I really admire the story, I don't think we should have had it when we had it. Though it is nice to see a Sixth Doctor story with in a multi-Doctor format. But yeah, it's just a shame that this wasn't actually a celebration of everything. This would also be the last television appearance of Patrick Troughton playing the Second Doctor, and Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrinnan, who also returns. Another important fact about this story is, although it's three-parter, it's the first three-parter since Planet of Giants, way back in the first Doctor era. This is actually part of the 45-minute per episode story, which means that this story has your average length of a 25-minute six-part story, taken in or out of the credits and opening title sequence, which means by far this is the longest in terms of runtime multi-Doctor story in the show's in the TV show's history. That includes Day of the Doctor and obviously Time Crash. I've stated everything I need to know about the story. In terms of the fan base, a lot of people like it. A lot of people find it one of the most enjoyable of the Sixth Doctor adventures. But there are some people who don't like this, and there are some people who think it's the best. There's a lot of feelings on it. But the majority of people think that this is a good story. It's a pretty good story. So anyway, the story actually starts off with the Second Doctor and Jamie. Now, as we're talking about the Second Doctor and Jamie, because they actually take a huge part of the plot in the first half. In fact, the Sixth Doctor doesn't even get involved in the plot until at least halfway through the first episode, and doesn't really get involved in the actual plot until part 2. But anyway, so the Second Doctor goes to meet Trastari because he's been sent on a mission by the Time Lords, which is this is a big factor in the season 6B theory, because in the original series with the Second Doctor, he was actually on the run from the Time Lords, and he would do his absolute best to get away from them. But here he seems to be on a mission for the Time Lords, which is contradictory to his original plot and his original stories. And obviously Jamie and Doctor seem a lot older in this story, but that could be due to the time differential even though the Jamie doesn't actually point it out. So who knows? And yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make any sense that the second Doctor's TARDIS is changed. The actual reasoning for this is that the original TARDIS was destroyed at this point, and so what they just did was they reused the Sixth Doctor's TARDIS, and they brought back the original console, which was replaced in the Five Doctors. So to give it a little bit of a retro feel, to make it feel like a bit of the continuity, but it's still a lot of issues, and is only really resolved if you consider season 6B as a genuine canon part of the aspects, or you could just consider it a fluff-in continuity. It's totally up to you. I personally like the season 6B theory for this story, but who knows? But anyway, so the second Doctor and Jamie go and meet Drastrasi because the Time Lords have sent them on a mission to examine, or at least halt, the Third Worlders, which is like Gallifreyan speak for like the class underneath Time Lords in terms of the galactic universe. And the Third Worlders are basically researching time travel, and two scientists called Katz and Reimer, they are very close to actually perfecting time travel, and the Doctor's telling them to basically stop, or at least halt, until the Time Lords can look into it, and if there's no issue, if there is nothing dangerous about this time experiment, then they could continue maybe. Although I think it's pretty obvious that the Doctor only really state that to try and convince Drastraki to halt his experiments. And Drastraki, he really doesn't want to. He first of all, he states that he has no qualifications to stop Katz and Reimer's work. But secondly, he doesn't want to because he feels like the Time Lords are basically overpowering them, basically stopping them from creating time travel just so they can hold basically the amount of powers they own. Because if other people learn time travel, then that weakens their political position, because they're the ones who can time travel, or at least the strongest ones who can time travel. Now, what's really great I like about this aspect is, though from this story's point of view, it is because Katz and Reimer's experiments might be a bit overboard. However, from what we know of the Time Lords, both prior and after this story, the theory of the Time Lord trying to stop them because they want to basically have all the power actually makes a lot of sense. And you could come up with the idea that that's the case, that's what's happening here, is that the Time Lords are the Time Lords are halting other people from gaining the same powers as them. But anyway, whilst they're there, they get the ship gets attacked. The space station camera gets attacked, which is where the Doctor was. It's also here that we get introduced to the main villain of the story. I can't remember her name, but basically she was part of the Amagram race. Algoritham race. These basically lower class race that thrive on food, especially meat. In fact, when the Doctor arrives on this space station, they actually land in the kitchen where they meet one of these creatures who tries to eat Jamie, which is in a really funny and quirky remark. And what happens then is Drastraki, he alternated her biochemistry and her DNA pattern so that she has the intelligence of a genius, and so she's like one of the smartest people on the space station. However, it's clear that she's working, she's got an alliance with the Sontarans, who make a reappearance in this story and would be their last televised story in the classic series, as we can see on the cover here. Now, a great shout out I want to give to this story is the music by Peter Howell. My God, this story has the best score in the classic series. From the Sontaran March to when we get onto Earth later on in the story, each piece of music is very memorable, with the Sontaran theme being one of my favourites in this story. And it really holds up so well that, like City of Death, I can imagine these pieces of music being played in New Who, in the newest series of Doctor Who. So that's really cool. But anyway, that's beside the point. Now, the Sontarans here, they have an alliance with this Algagum. I'm just going to call her the villain. She's played by Jacqueline Pierce, who might be better known for her role in Blake 7. This would be her first Doctor Who contribution. She would later return to the franchise in the series of War Doctor audio dramas. So that's really cool, and she does a fantastic job playing this really conniving but clearly sophisticated lady who has this plan to try and steal a Time Lord so they can take his genetic material so that they can get their time traveling machine to work. It's later revealed that she is also... It's strange because at one point Draskaki, who gets revealed to be working for her and the Sontarans, states that she is the mind behind Starks and Reimer's experiments, implying that Cart and Reimer didn't actually exist, it was all her all along. But later on in the story, he still mentions Cart and Reimer, so maybe she worked more on their project, which has gotten them so close to actual time travel than they are. But anyway, this leaves the space station in shatters, and Jamie actually sees the second Doctor get tortured and presumably killed. This then takes our story way back onto on a unknown planet. I believe it's named, but I just can't remember, where we get introduced in this story to Perry and the Sixth Doctor, who is trying to catch some fish. And we get some really great quotes here, like the Doctor quotes, he claims to quote Rassilon in that there's nothing that a Time Lord can do more than fishing, but then Perry corrects him that it was a quote by someone else, and he said it about spending money. We get the classic line of the Sixth Doctor saying, well, what's the point of good quotation if you can't change it? Which is one of the Sixth Doctor's most iconic lines. And though the Doctor and Perry are a bit grumpy to each other, in this story, Perry does kind of stand up for herself in a few scenes. So their relationship here is a lot more bearable than it is in most appearances. And so the Sixth Doctor goes into the TARDIS and he feels a pain. He feels that that a part of himself has been taken away into his past, which he doesn't understand. And in fact, he talks about this circular paradox of he can't be dead then and still be alive now. And then Perry suggests he gets medical help. And the Doctor first scuffers this, and then he's like, actually, that's not a bad idea. And then he gives out a list of famous people he knows, and then he says, Draskaki, we'll go and meet him on the space station camera. And it's like, it's a good idea, wasn't it, of mine? To what? To get medical help. And Perry just rolls her eyes, it's like, oh my God. But anyway, they land on the ship in the kitchen, where they see a bunch of dead bodies and the ship basically massacred, as the Doctor explains the there's been some sort of battle here. And they later meet up with the computer of the ship, who states that the Time Lords have done this. That the Time Lords were looking into these experiments and tried to stop them from getting information. But the Doctor doesn't believe it. And then the Doctor looks into Drashtarki's office and looks into his books to discover that they were actually working on time travel, and that the Time Lords were actually trying to halt their experiments on here. And the Doctor basically works out that if there was some sort of time experiment during this, he could technically continue to live and die at the same time. And so the ship tries to kill them, first by freezing them to death and taking the air out, and then boiling them in Drashtarki's office. And then later on, they go through some pipes to try and turn the computer off in this game of life and death. But Perry actually hears some sort of creature, somebody growling whilst following them. And the Doctor's trying to work out how to deprogram it. However, Perry gets attacked by this creature, and the Doctor gets distracted, setting off a booby trap, which is our cliffhanger, where the Doctor gets gassed and he collapses, falling off the rails, and gets his body caught in some wires. Now, I really like this first episode, but that cliffhanger really does suck. Especially the way it's shot. Now, speaking of the way it's shot, Peter Moffat's last story as director. Though there are some hiccups, like I said, the cliffhanger for part 1 is really weak. The story looks fantastic from the space station camera, and I really like the use of lighting in the scenes. It makes you really feel like a spaceship, and I especially like the when they go to like the air vents or the scaffolding area, and we're just bathed in these purple and green lights that fill our screens, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And then later when we go onto Earth, there's some amazing location footage. But yeah, so Peter Moffat leaves with a bang. But anyway, part 2 ends with Perry basically knocking the guy out and rescuing the Doctor. And Perry's like, I feel really bad. He's probably just protecting his nest, but he's definitely a humanoid. And the Doctor's like, yes, let me see. Jamie! You know him? Yes, it's my old friend Jamie. If he's here, that must mean I'm also here. Which is a paradox beyond anything. And Jamie later states that he's seen the Doctor get killed. And the Doctor basically panics about this, that because of the timelines, so it's going to catch up to him. So the Doctor and Perry go around looking for more evidence on what's happening. And Jamie also makes references to the Sontarans, although he doesn't know what they are. He basically explains that they have no necks, they're big, chunky 3 fingers, and they're warrior-like. So the Doctor works out that they are Sontarans. Now, what's really cool about this is that this is actually in keeping with continuity, as the 3rd Doctor, when he first met the Sontarans in The Time Warrior, the story in which the Sontarans debuted, he stated already that he has already met them. So the 2nd Doctor already knowing that the Sontarans, who they are, actually still in keeping with the continuity. So that's really neat. But anyway, and so the Doctor, Perry, and Jamie track the 2nd Doctor to Seville, which would be the first time the Doctor appeared in Seville since the Flames of Chardis in the 1st Doctor audio drama, from our chronological point of view. So that's really cool. And the Doctor actually makes reference that he's already been there, and he remembers hearing the distinct sound of a particular bell in Seville. So that's really cool. And then they travel to Seville to try and track down the second Doctor who's been captured. And here's where I think the story really picks up, in my opinion, as we have the second Doctor, basically the prisoner here, and he's working out what's going on, and he gets some really great banter and tries to trick the Sontaran to dishonor him so that he can take off his bond so that they could fight, only for the second Doctor to escape. However, that doesn't go as planned. And what's really great about this story is the dynamic between Dostraki and his augmented accomplice, the main villain, shall we say, and their relationship with the Sontarans, because both of them clearly don't trust each other, but they need one another's help. And what's really great about this is that we as an audience gets to see the unsteady relationship of their point of view. What's really good about this is that despite the Sontarans not being the main villain of the story, they don't get overshadowed. You still feel like this is a Sontaran story. In fact, fun fact, the original script that was put out for this segment of season 22 was actually a story called The First Sontaran, which was going to be an Sontaran origin story. However, John Nathan Turner wanted a multi-Doctor story, and so Robert Holmes wrote The Two Doctors instead. So that's really cool. And later on, Big Finish would actually adaptate the first Sontaran storyline into the Lost Story range, which I don't have that particular story, so we won't be tackling it, I'm afraid, but it is really cool to note. Whilst in Seville, the sixth Doctor, Perry, and Jamie befriend Oscar and Anita. One of them is a tourist that's gone there to catch moths, but he's also working at a restaurant nearby, and Anita is basically his friend and assistant throughout Seville. And they spot the Sontaran ship, believing it's some sort of plane crash, and it's crash landed near a little house where an old lady lives, who gets brutally murdered. One of the things about this story that a lot of people note is that it's incredibly violent. A lot of characters, especially some innocent characters, seem to get murdered for mainly just to put some real sting into the story. And it was heavily criticised for it. But personally, I think for this particular story, it works very well in highering the stakes to allow us a second Doctor, two Doctors crossover. And so the Doctor teams up with Oscar and Anita to work out. He basically pretends, because he travelled in a police box, that the Doctor is actually a police officer who's undercover, and Oscar and Anita kind of become a part of the team, shall we say, for a little bit before they go back onto their own restaurant. And this is where we get a lot of scenes with one of the chef from the story, Shokai, whose only interest really is food. And in fact, it was his suggestion that they go to Earth, because after meeting Jamie, he really wants to try human meat. So throughout the story, it's about like him. He basically becomes like his own. He basically has his own plot in which he starts wanting to eat things, and he's just such a fun character to be around. The actor who plays him does a fantastic job, and not only maybe almost pantomime-y, but in a good way, with really strong gestures and that six pirate, kind of like pirate accent and his silly costume, but just the way his attitude is, and how he despite him basically being a primitive, he considers human beings primitive, and that they're basically worthy to be eaten, basically. And one of my favourite bits in this story is actually the plot of episode 3, as Dothraki is basically having trouble because he keeps getting distracted on finding the second Doctor's Time Lord DNA, which allows them to time travel. However, the woman basically explains that she has a contingency plan to turn the Doctor into her original species, an algorum, whatever they're called, green, orange eyebrows, and just always thinking about food. Now, the second Doctor, the sixth Doctor goes into the basement to try and find him, but gets met up with the Sontaran as the Doctor explains that they need the Doctor's DNA, and him just travelling in their time machine once will allow it to work completely, so that anybody can then use this machine. And the Sontarans basically overheard this, capture the Doctor and Jamie, and they basically come up with a plan then to betray Dothraki and the woman. So and then use this time machine to go to the Sontaran battle, where they can so that he can lead his army to victory. The sixth Doctor basically reveals that he knew that the Sontarans were there, and so he basically lied to Jamie that the time machine will still not work. But what the Doctor wasn't expecting is that the Sontarans were going to stay there and basically bluff them until they can assassinate them and then travel off. However, the Doctor soon realises that, quickly learns that there's actually a double bluff, as Dothraki and the lady, basically with this contingency plan, don't need the Sontarans anymore, and allows the Sontarans to be murdered, only for one of them to have survived, goes into the time machine and then gets murdered by it, as it affects his biochemistry, makes him basically blows up. There's a great scene where Shark Guy actually finds one of the legs of the Sontaran, which I find really funny. And Jamie actually stabs the Sontaran in the leg, which is, like I said, part of the over-violence of this story. Now, the main plot of episode 3 is that Shark Guy, who basically feels betrayed because they wanted his DNA, and so they knock him out to help with converting the Doctor into his species. And he gets a bit angry, and then he breaks out of his bonds, and he kind of is about to basically attack the second Doctor. Only the second Doctor now has orange eyebrows and spots on his face like him. Basically, the second Doctor has become an algorithm, whatever they're bloody called. Note to self, I am terrible with names. Anyway, and what happens here is that the second Doctor, now only thinking about, who can only constantly think about food, actually teams up with Shark Guy to escape from this small building and go on basically an eating fest, as the Doctor basically gets them dressed up in a tidy suit and stuff, and they go travelling to the city of Seville. And the sixth Doctor, basically realising what's going on, fears that he's going to slowly start changing into an algorithm. So they go hunting for the second Doctor and Shark-Eye, who have now basically become best pals. And I really, really, really love this aspect of the story in which they just go around just talking about food and pretending to be all gentleman-like. I especially like the scene in which Shark-Eye asks, do they eat their own kind? And the second Doctor is like, I've heard that they do it somewhere in the Indies, but I remember a dish, it's called shepherd's pie. That is just a great joke. And they actually go into Oscar's restaurant and they just order a bunch of food, constantly just eating and eating and eating, whilst Dostraki and whatever her name is, they go looking for the second Doctor and Shark-Eye, and basically they're on a race. There's actually a nice little cameo from, I believe it's the costume designer, who gives Dostraki a flower. Who gives Dostraki a flower and throws out the window. That's a really nice scene. Shows a lot of somberness in Peter Moffat's directing style. But anyway, the sixth Doctor finds them before Dostraki does, but before they can arrive, Shark-Eye actually murders Oscar as they don't have any money to pay for the food. And so we get a really, really silly scene, in my opinion. I think this scene could have easily been cut and is actually worthy of criticism, in which Oscar gets murdered for seemingly no reason other than to bring violence to the plot. And his death scene is just so overdramatic and so unworthy of a side character, as he quotes Shakespeare, and is just it's just painful to watch. But apart from that, the third episode is really good. So when they escape from the sixth Doctor, basically pretends to be a police officer and arrests the second Doctor. Shark-Eye escapes, and the Doctor gets converted back to normal. And when they go out, they get captured by Dostraki and a woman. But so they go into the building only for the Doctor to basically convince the time machine, and they've altered it so that it will now absorb the sixth Doctor, DNA, so that they can allow him to time travel. And so the sixth Doctor gets in and travels a little bit into it, and he then escapes, and Shark-Eye goes after him. But he stabs the sixth Doctor, and basically he's injured, and he smells blood, and there's bits of blood on the floor. And Dostraki and the woman, they see this, and she actually goes up to the floor and puts a hand on it and starts licking it. Basically, her original species, her species instincts start kicking in, and Dostraki, watching this, basically realises that what he's doing is wrong, and so he actually betrays her by helping Perry and the second Doctor escape. Now, whilst here, the sixth Doctor bumps into some of Oscar's stuff that he's left there, one of them being cyanide, and he actually kills Shark-Eye and gives a James Bond quote where he's like, you've gotten your just desserts, or something like that. Now, in Vengeance on Varos, I thought that scene was really out of place, but here, and just seeing how disgusting Shark-Eye is, I think here it actually works in bringing the darker side of the Doctor, a Doctor who's seen death so much that not only does it not bother him, but he can actually joke about it. I think here it feels a little more natural, and it doesn't bother me here. And so the lady then travels, kills Jostraki, and uses the time machine, only for the Sixth Doctor to reveal that when he went into the future, or wherever it went, he actually altered the machinery so it only worked once for him. Twice, sorry, because he knew that that this woman was going to basically use Perry as a test subject. So Perry went in the machine and came back just fine, and then this character went in and she gets blown up because of it. And that's basically ending our story as the Second Doctor summons his TARDIS using a device that the Time Lords gave him. In a really funny scene, the Sixth Doctor's like, "Where do you get one of those? I've always wanted one of those." Until you click, hold on, they're the same person. So the Doctor's had one. So, but yeah, and then the Second Doctor's like, "Goodbye, I hope you don't meet me again in the future or in the past." And then we get a lovely little moment in which him and Jamie are like, "After you." "No, after you, Doctor." "No, after you." And then they go up, and then upstairs then Sixth Doctor and Perry are like, they seem like very nice people and blah blah. It's like, yeah, and then it's like, "After you." The Sixth Doctor looks downstairs, he turns back to Perry, he's like, "No, after you." And they also state that, like, because of Shawkeye and his like obsession with meats and all that, for them two, they're going to have a vegetarian diet from now on, basically emphasising Robert Holmes' vegetarian politics in this story. And that's the two Doctors. Overall, personally, it is actually my favourite story of the multi-Doctor stories. The stakes might not be high enough to justify bringing multiple Doctors in. Like, there's no battle against Time Lords or like the whole universe is being corrupt. It just seems like the Sontarans and this alternated DNA augmentated person. So I don't think it really justifies them being there. But for what it's worth, I think it's really good. Each of the Doctors get a moment to shine. In fact, it feels less like a Six Doctors multi-Doctor story and more of just a multi-Doctor story, as each Doctor seems to have equal aspects to the stories and feels a lot more like a smoother crossover than previous stories and later on stories as well, coming to think about it. However, there are some issues. The overlength might be an issue for some. It can get a bit silly sometimes. Sometimes the acting can get a bit more flamboyant than I think it really should. But the directing by Peter Moffat is fantastic. And Robert Holmes, though, brings us a script with heavy political themings about vegetarianism and his disdain for meat. It doesn't overshine our characters and the action of the adventure. So I say highly recommended. The Two Doctors, a great story. So there you go. So join me next time when the Sixth Doctor comes face to face to face with the Borad. I'll see you next time on Time Lash. I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!